on my lap as we go.
I love that. What kind of dog is he? Have you ever done one of the DNA tests?
I haven't done the test, but we kind of know he's a boxer shepherd.
Okay.
So that's about all we've got. But he's got that unique ability to nap for 12 seconds and be fully recharged.
There you
So
go.
he definitely has a lot of that
That's
puppy energy still.
a really unique combo. My dog's we did the DNA test, and she's a mix of like a boxer and an Australian cattle dog and like 10 other things too. But I always love the boxer because they're so handsy. They'll use their hands to do everything.
Yes. For good and for bad. So,
yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, I believe with that now, I'm checking on LinkedIn and on YouTube and on X now, as you call it. I believe we're live on all of them. So I think we should be all set to go. Awesome. Cool. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Design to Dev. My name is Nico here from Zeppelin and Omelette. And today I have with me Taylor. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, my name's Taylor Cashdan. For work, I'm a design systems manager at the Mayo Clinic, and we're working on the next evolution of our internal design system.
Awesome. Cool. With that being said, what does your typical day-to-day sort of look like in that role?
Yeah, it kind of varies sometimes day by day by the hour. But for the most part, I spend time supporting the core team we have. So we've got 3 designers and 2 engineers directly responsible for maintaining, building, shipping the system. We've got some product partners we interface with, and then the rest of the org. So a lot of my day-to-day is interacting with those folks and either helping refine the work we're doing or steering the strategy or doing that sort of tactical work, and then often providing insight or advice or just working through problems with the team, because a lot of them are relatively new to systems work. So I've done it a couple times at a few places, so it's a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussion, a lot of shared learning. So a lot of that slow drip stuff to make a team kind of work well together.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Would you say your role more closely relates to, or does it closely relate, in your opinion, to a design ops person? Because I know that's a pretty emerging new field that similarly deals with, the troubles between design and dev. Is that similar to what you're working on, or?
I think a flavor of it. So we have a director of design ops, and then she's great. She supports that whole operation side of how XD and design is done at scale. My flavoring of it is systems operations and library sharing and that. So I support her and their initiatives on doing that stuff, and then in the flavor of what we need to do for the system. But we do a lot of operations work for the system itself, whether it's process or communication or setting up support channels and stuff. So in that vein, yeah, a lot of that is part of the job. But we don't necessarily operate as an ops group for the whole org, just because I think right now that in the same way design systems are very vague, so is ops on what it covers and what it doesn't cover.
Sure.
So thankfully we have dedicated folks internally to handle some of that as well.
Awesome. Very cool. I kind of wanted to know too, because, you started out as a designer. What are some of your core beliefs or experiences that sort of shaped you the most?
Yeah, I mean, core belief, I think the if you bubble it all down, I mean, I think this is going to sound very woo-woo, but I think design is more a way of thinking than it is a tactical, thing. Tools change, frameworks change, styles change, needs change, but at the end of the day, design as a whole is a flavor of problem solving, right? We just happen right now to do it visually on apps, right? But 5-10 years ago, and to be clear, this still exists, but it was primarily print, right? Or newspapers and ads and billboards, and all that stuff still exists. But there's been a shift, probably, to the more digital space of things, regardless of digital advertising, into the more app design and website design and all that. So I'm very agnostic in that sense. I've had my career started in doing, page layout for newspapers and Photoshop work and little graphics and stuff.
Okay.
And it just kind of took seasons along the way. And I kind of got, my shaping, I guess, into the systems world was I was really involved in brand work a lot in a different phase of life. And system stuff really clicked for me because it was, when you boil out the deliverables and the actual work, it's the same as brand work, right? You're building parts of a whole that have to represent some sort of visual and functional aesthetic across a suite of tools or sites or whatever. It's just a different output than what is done by brand teams. So that was a nice transition for me, going from traditional graphic design into brand work, into some visual design, into a quick stint in UX and web stuff, and then directly into systems, because it's all got that core vein of just making sure that there's some sort of consistency, and then ultimately helping other designers and engineers and product folks do their jobs better. or more efficiently, or help them, unblock their problems.
I love that. That's awesome. If you had to pick, sort of an inspiration to this common thread that you've seen here, could you point it to somebody, something, like who or what would be your inspiration as a designer?
That's interesting. I think the overall theme for me, I think, goes back to that problem solving thing, right? And helping others, right? It sounds so very, again, it's very little woo woo, but that's where all this kind of relates back for me, is like the systems in particular scratches that itch. I get to help teach others, right, and help them learn a different way of thinking, or to ways they can trim out some of the stuff that just it doesn't require a lot of thought, but often requires a lot of manual labor, right? And on the other side of that, it's all about day-to-day problem solving. And to me, that's what design, capital D is doing that. So I don't have a particular like, oh, this person, changed my perspective. It's more like I enjoy problem solving, and this satisfies that itch.
There you go. I love to hear it. That's been a common thread so far for the other folks that we've chatted with too, is just at the end of the day, it's user first, solving their problems. And I love that that's carried through as sort of like an industry standard too. That's awesome to see. Cool. Awesome. So the next sort of little segment I like to call is overrated or underrated. So I'm just going to throw a few different terms at you, whether they're fonts, different styles of design. And you can tell me if they're overrated, underrated, or you can also go properly rated as well too. A little bit of an explanation as well. So to start off, we've got 3 different fonts. The first font is Inter. Overrated or underrated?
I would say overrated with a slight properly rated. I think it just has become everyone's default, and that happens with everything cyclically. Like in the beginning, it's like, oh, definitely underrated, and then it's like, oh, I see it everywhere. Like, some originality, but it serves its purpose. So I think that's the nice part. Like it works really well for UI, for example. So properly rated in that regard, overrated as like the font you need to be using.
There you go. I love that the cycle of underrated to overrated. It's just one big circle. The next one, speaking of Helvetica, overrated or underrated?
Ugh, I feel the same way. I think it's just yet another another really functional thing, and when it gets overused, it becomes overrated, kind of thing. But if we boil it down to like the right thing for the right time for the right medium, then they're both properly rated. I think it's one of those things that folks are really defensive about, and I don't really understand why. Like I know there's strong opinions and all that, but like if it works to the problem you're solving, then check mark, you're good to go.
There you go. All right. And the last font is Papyrus.
All right, hot take, underrated.
There you go.
Papyrus gets a lot of shit, and it's because it has a purpose and it gets overused. But like I think what's nice about Papyrus and why I think it's a little underrated is it's stuck around, like despite all the criticism and all the crap and all the misuse and billboard use of a font that was made to like emulate like literally ink on papyrus paper. It gets so much attention, positive and negative, but it's still here. So it serves a function really well, right? It makes kids' book reports seem aged, right? It works really well on like things that are meant to look like they're from Egypt, all that sort of stuff. And it just gets so much crap for really just being functional for its purpose. I think people try to use it for things it shouldn't be, and then of course it gets to be this whole deep discussion, like the SNL skits on like the Avatar stuff. And you haven't seen the latest one; they came out with the part 2, and it is perfect. So, highly recommend checking that out.
You just gotta give some props and respect to Papyrus for its longevity for all of it. Love that.
It has stuck around longer than many people's tops, so we can go with that, right?
Yeah, there you go. These next 2 are sort of hand in hand. So first off, flat design. Do you think flat design overrated or underrated?
I think it's properly rated. I think it's one of those things that depends on the medium. I think flat design gets a lot of shit because it doesn't have a lot of personality and texture, and that's fine when it's used right. On a site or an app that doesn't need to be in your face or very stylistic, but just needs to be functional, flat design works great, right? Yeah. It's clear, it's understandable by everybody, and it has a function. I think when folks try to use it, again, overarchingly on everything that need oomph or need texture or need interactive levels, it starts to break, but properly rated.
There you go. All right. And then the follow-up, hand-in-hand skeuomorphism. What do you think about that?
Yeah, also properly rated. It had its prime on when it was like, oh, underrated, this is the coolest thing, and then it got very saturated. But it was cool for the period of time when that was popular, and I think it's still fun to like look back at it and be like, oh, this was like a thing we either over-indexed on or we didn't do enough of. But I think for its time and for its life cycle, properly rated.
There you go. And then the last one for you here is naming your layers. Overrated or underrated?
Highly underrated. And the reason I say this is if you work with anyone but yourself, you owe it to them to name the damn layers. Like you have people coming into your file, trying to understand what you're doing. Like it takes extra time to do for sure. But if you bake that into the way you do stuff, even if you just, let's talk about Figma exclusively for a second. If you just name your like frames and your groups, like that's enough. Not every single element maybe needs a name or fix things, but like anytime you can help other people understand how you got to where you are, like is the best way to do communication. And why not take the extra few seconds, name this layer parent container or website 1 instead of frame 48437.
I love that. That's I think too, one of the big things, of course, here at Zeppelin that we're super big on is collaboration and that whole workflow and making it easier for people to work together. And so anything like that, any way to tidy up your workflow, any way to present your designs a little better for your devs, anything is just will help out that entire process. So that's awesome to hear you say that. That's really cool. Awesome. That's great. That sort of wraps up our little over under segment. That your answers were fantastic. I love that. That was great.
Awesome.
Moving into our next section is sort of just a little bit more about your process, your whole workflow too. So the first question here for you, since you do work with designers and developers, how is your relationship with your developers currently from your position?
On the team, we're very tight knit. We work daily together, but I think it's one of those things like every org has a different maturity scale and where they are in that collaboration cycle. It also depends on how that model is staffed. Like, do you use external partners? Do you have internal designers and developers and all that sort of stuff? So, from a team perspective, it's taken a bit of time for them to kind of vibe into doing things together and realizing like, hey, we are tight knit. We're meant to be collaborating daily, kind of thing. When they're in some cases used to that production flow of like, all right, we hand it off and we never talk again. So they're realizing the benefit as we start to do that more and we start getting into like the tactical nature of the work. So it's evolving. And I think the connective tissue there is like, because we're a tool for tool makers, right? That there's another layer to it of like, what about our consuming engineers and designers, right? And the relations between them. And that has some room to grow. But it's because we're trying to, build some foundational stuff to be able to actually have something to talk about with them. So we try to bridge that gap as much as possible. But I've never really understood the big like, oh, throw it over the wall. Engineers always mess up our designs and designers never do this right. It's like, yeah, if you just take 5 minutes to have a conversation like adults, like you probably fix that problem. So that's my hot take, because there shouldn't be a bad relationship between any partners that are working to build a thing, personalities aside.
There you go. Yeah, I feel like so often too, a lot of the discourse is based on pitting designers and developers against each other. Of like, oh, this is us, this is what we do, this is you, this is what you do. When it's like, right. At the end of the day, you're all doing the same thing. Like you're all coming together to make something for somebody.
It's like nobody's asking that question like doctors and nurses. Like it's part of the goal. Like to help a patient, they do that. Like to build a thing, designers have to talk to engineers and vice versa. Like if there's no communication, then you're just shipping useless garbage. And you're going to have those cycles of rework and design debt and engineering debt indefinitely, when you could maybe get ahead of that with like a weekly check-in, or a 5-minute meeting every now and then to just be like, hey, can we check this thing before you just plow through on it?
Yeah.
So
I'm passionate about that. There you go. I love it. It's great to see. When you said doctors and nurses, I immediately thought I was like just imagining a doctor giving just like a stack of papers to a nurse, and it's like their doctor's handwriting, can't read it at all. So the nurse is standing there like, what the hell is going on? What are you talking about here?
And I'm sure that happens, but like when the stakes are so high and something like that, like they're going to force themselves to talk. I think there's a nuance to our work that there's another design systems practitioner named Lauren Lopret. And in her schema presentation last year, one of the final slides was something along the lines of like, remember that this is just rectangles on the internet, right? At the end of the day. And it's a nice reset, right? When we're like, oh, this is so intense. Like, why won't so-and-so collaborate? So it's like, let's take a beat. Like we're making websites. Like we're not, shaping global culture. Like take a chill, have a conversation. It's not going to kill you. It'll be so cutthroat. But
that's perfect. I love that. You can feel the passion from you, which is fantastic. And I think we need so much more of that to really bring and affect some change, which is great.
Sure.
That's awesome. Cool. Speaking, about your design system team too, how is communication with your core design system team different from maybe members who just use your design system or other, internal users? Like what's different about that?
Yeah. So our internal team has a set of core rituals, right? That we have, every week, every cycle, every sprint, whatever terminology you want to use. So we have, touch points where we're doing kind of like critique or discussion or debate, depending on what the topic is. We have asynchronous touch points where we're kind of checking in with each other on work that's happening. We use Asana to track our work. So there's a lot of communication happening daily on top of like our MS Teams channel. We've got different, flavors of conversation happening in there all the time. So our team's really good at keeping up with each other. We have to be really intentional about how, when, where, and for how long, and then at what duration, all that stuff we interact with the community. So we've got a series of standing conventions. Like we have a Teams channel, for example, that's like dedicated solely to support. And we've got like an engineering channel and a design channel and an announcements and updates channel that we use to communicate when things are happening, things are changing, new stuff's coming out, whatever. And we try to direct folks instead of like sending us or anyone on the core team like direct messages with questions like, hey, go to the channel, because if you drop your question in there, first of all, we can answer it quicker because there's more of us, that can triage that. But also there's probably 1 to 3 other people that have the same question. So if we can answer it once, it saves us the time, right? I don't think folks realize, because they're not responsible for this, but, consumers that are working on projects, right? And I call users of the system consumers for sake of context, but consumers of a system, right, are focused on their need, their project, because that's their job, right? So they don't know or necessarily think about like, if you send me 1 DM, it probably means there's 10 other people also doing that. So now I have 11 DMs to answer that are 4 of them are the same question, right? So we try to cycle async comms through the channels that we have to support. But we also have an office hours session that we have once a sprint, where it's a drop in at any time. And that's right now the what we have. And to me, it's a bare minimum, right? That's like the baseline. But it's because we're kind of trying to build that foundational establishment, or alpha, so we can get into a pilot phase and do the kind of next thing. But once we get past that, we'll have more. The idea is we want to have a few discipline specific sessions. So like one specifically for engineers that's like a working session, and one for designers that's a working session, so that we can do more out in the open versus the office hours is more like, hey, bring us your questions, and the channel is more like, here's what's already done. There's a lot of things that we want to build with our consumers or decide with our consumers rather than for them, not only so that they feel part of the process, but so we're making sure that we're actually meeting their needs and not just building crap they can't use. So we're working up the rituals and the construct and the kind of SLA style agreement on how and what and where we'll do all that. But it's a large maturation effort of culture to make sure that folks like show up to those things and have an appetite for that kind of discussion in the first place.
That's awesome. That's amazing to hear. When you said office hours, it reminded me of first Davey and PJ's podcast, the design system office hours too. Great. Yeah, and that's just something too that I've heard so often that does eventually help everybody, is bring everybody together. And so that's really great that you have that sort of like embedded almost in your entire process.
Or at least provide a forum where folks can come if and when they want to. Because we have folks that show up to office hours that don't ask questions; they're just there for the conversation, and that's great. Like they can drop in. Like we have an agenda that's loose. Like if you're on the agenda, we're going to hit those topics. But if someone's there and has a question or a topic they didn't have a chance to put on the agenda, like we're going to hit it. We're going to talk through it. But the more chances we can do that in an open air forum, so to speak, the more others can weigh in, and we can have like conscientious debate about what we're doing and why, and share all those learnings. So.
I love that. That's awesome. It's very interesting to see too, because that's been a big trend that I've noticed specifically, just about bringing everybody together, making sure everybody does have some say in it. Too, like you said, make sure you're building shit that people will actually use. So looking forward, what does the future of design systems look like to you?
I think we're going to see a change in the tactical day-to-day. As more and more code frameworks, come out that are like, pre-built stuff, or package this, package that, or AI or Figma tooling or Sketch tooling or whatever ecosystem you're in, like the tools across the board, no matter your discipline, are getting smarter and they're getting more robust and they're providing more detail and more stuff. And I think what we're noticing, and I think we're going to see it in design systems maybe first, is there's a lot of work that may have been traditionally part of a team's scope of work, like for example, building a button component that we can automate now, or we can pull down from a resource and evolve. So I think the job is changing a little bit, but I don't think the core principles of like consistency, communication, all that stuff that makes a system work is going anywhere. We can't automate our way out of an office hours, So I think it really depends on what you as a practitioner care about. Like we need folks that are purely IC folk that just want to stay in the file and do the work, right? We'll always need those people. But I've always been a proponent that like design systems work in particular is communications work first, whether it's documentation, release notices, hearing from consumers, talking to consumers, whatever. Oh, that's 80% of the job, to then spend 10% of the time building the thing and then 10% of the time trying to figure out what went wrong. So that's the scope of it, from my perspective. So I think it's one of those things like systems as a whole and as a field or a discipline, it'll be what we make it to be. If we dig our heels in and are like, no, it's all about building the objects. It's like, well, then we're going to get swallowed up by all these tools that eventually help make that faster. But if we continue to like lean on the fact that like design systems are culture change dependent, right? And then it requires that change management, that working style difference, that reacclimation, that like the title product designer or software engineer doesn't only mean being in the file doing the thing. It means talking, it means communicating, it means problem solving, it means making hard decisions. Like that's the bulk of those jobs. It's not purely a tactical asset delivery job. And somewhere along the lines, I think we've forgotten that. And I think that's subject to also the fact that like, we've got job titles being thrown around loosely. I've been a UX designer, graphic design specialist, design systems lead product designer, and it's in some veins all been a similar job, right?
Mm-hmm.
But each of those titles come with a different pay band, a different level of internal respect, and all the weird shit that comes from different company cultures. So I think we've unintentionally muddied the water on like whose responsibility is what. So all that's to say, the space from a design systems perspective is so abstract. The tooling's been around for forever, but it being a formalized discipline where folks have teams dedicated to it, practitioners that are doing this, is only like 5 to 7 years old, give or take. And that's really, really new in the context of like large scale, internet, history and the jobs that go into that. So I think it's ripe for the taking on whatever it is we want to point it to.
Awesome. And you had mentioned AI too. Do you see AI currently or in the future as a way to speed up and help with the communication process, or is it more about the production process? Like, what do you think about AI in design systems?
I think AI in general, as it was originally meant to be, is just another tool, right? I think what people rightfully or wrongfully get scared about, it's going to replace our jobs and whatever. And yet we see like, those same folks are then reposting the video of the robot falling down when it like trips on a leaf, So it's like the tech might be there in 10 years, 15 years. And we think like, Will Smith's iRobot and there's all these, monsters running around and all that risk. But if you peel back the onion now, like you take one AI bot, let's just say, right? It still requires a software engineer to write that code, someone to design that UI, someone to maintain those servers. Like there's so much human effort right now still that's keeping the AI thing afloat, that I don't see it as a threat. I see it as a tool that we can eventually evolve and shape and mold into what we need it to be. Whether it's I'm stuck on the best way to explain this usage guideline on this piece of documentation, or I can't find a way to make this communication shorter, more concise, more to the point. Like that's what these tools, at least today, can help with, right?
Mm-hmm.
My engineers often are like, I can't figure out this, this bug, and staring at it for a period of time. Maybe having a non-human set of eyes just do a quick pass can maybe identify the thing, and then I can fix it. Because we forget that like we do have a human element, right? That we have pattern recognition, we have a little bit of alert blindness as we go, and having a tool like an AI, for example, that can be an extension of you or a helper is one thing. Now, I think the other side of that, and we don't have to dig into this too deeply, but like the AI generated art side of it, where it's stealing and feeding from folks' livelihoods, like that's an entirely different space, and I don't consider those the same when we talk about AI. I think that's an entirely different model, and that one's far more dangerous and destructive. But that's a whole different vein.
Yeah, maybe we'll do another session on that, just on that, because I feel like there is a lot to be said there. Awesome, cool. That sort of my last question for you here is, I guess, just like more of a kind of going back to your term, like a little woo-woo question. Do you see design systems almost as like a connector between design and development, or are design systems like the future of collaboration between designers and developers?
I think the problem with the design system space right now is there's nothing we can do about this, but we keep calling it design systems, right? And the problem with that is folks see the word design first and think it's only for designers, or it's related to the design of a thing, where there's so much infrastructure work, historical reference that goes into documentation, problem solving, engineering systems, framework, structure, accessibility, design, all those different disciplines and categories are all part of this thing we call design systems. So the misnomer of the name kind of hurts us in that regard, because then you have product partners or engineering partners that go, the design system, the thing for designers. It's like no, but we also do code, and we have like release maps and all these sorts of things. So all that's to say, I think it can be the way I typically describe like what makes a system versus just a UI kit or just a component library is I think of it like a stool, right? You've got a three-legged stool. You've got the code, you've got the design assets, and you've got the documentation. That's your three legs, right? The connecting bars that keep those legs, afloat is your communication model, your roadmap, and your support channels. Right, all those things keep those three in sync, and then all of that is so that you can sit the company's products on top of the stool. Right, so if it's unstable, you don't have one of those three legs, or a connector bar is missing, things are rocky. Right,
Yeah.
so you need those connective tissues in a certain sense to make sure that you can really truly realize the power of the thing you're building. Now, that's not to say that like organizations or companies that say only have a component library, only have a UI kit, or only have a doc site are doing anything wrong. Maybe that's just the need of that org. But I think there's a little bit of a magical harmony when you have those three resources, and then all of the support functions and upkeep and all that stuff that goes into play, where you can really hit that operational threshold that's like, oh, now we can benefit everybody instead of just the designers, just the engineers, just whomever, because we're only serving up one thing.
Yeah, if you haven't already, I'm looking forward to your post describing that the Taylor stool method. I think that's fantastic. I love it. That's great. That was a great way to put it, and I think it'll ideally help a lot more people realize that it's much more than just the first part of design systems. So yeah. Awesome. That was fantastic. That wraps up the interview portion. Now I've got a little bit of a fun section to end us off with. I've got some rapid fire questions, and then a section where we'll test your design skills in Paint. But for the first ones, here are some rapid fire questions. If you need to take a few seconds to think of an answer, you're more than welcome to. If you had to guess, how many rectangles have designers created?
Ever? Oh God. And if zillions is a number, I would go with that. I mean, I could say in my own files, just drawing squares happens a shitload, even if I'm not even using it for stuff. So like, I've probably done 1 million on my own. So I'd say like zillion squared. Full perspective.
Zillion squared. That's a good one. That's the highest answer that we've had so far, and I appreciate that because I feel like it's closer to reality there. Yeah. If you could describe your design process in 3 words, what would those 3 words be?
Messy, revision based. So I'm hyphenating that word. And I don't know, stressful. And I say that because I think those 3 kind of pair together with, like, I think if you go through each of those cycles, right, to do each of those pieces, like you're stress testing your work, right? You're trying to analyze it to make sure it's right, as opposed to just cranking out stuff to crank out stuff. In that case, you're making art, and that's great. But I think that's the difference between art and design.
All right, beautiful. If you could describe your design system in 1 word, what would it be?
Evolving. I think as we learn new things and who we need to support and what we want to do for the long term, I mean, every system, in my opinion, should be always evolving. Like, doesn't mean you need to have major version change every 20 minutes, but you should always be kind of looking at what's next for who your consumers are and what they need to make sure you can help them stay ahead of their own curve.
Yeah, I love that. And then if you could describe yourself in 1 word, what would that be?
Chaotic.
That's true to the brand, true to your bios, everything too. The consigliere of chaos. I love that. Perfect. Beautiful. That wraps it up for our questions. And now we're moving into a segment that I like to lovingly call "So You Think You're a Designer," where we ask our esteemed guests to try to recreate the Zeppelin logo in a Microsoft Paint browser-based version. So if you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen, and we can get started.
I'm as ready as I think I'll ever be. So.
Perfect. We see it. It looks good.
Here. All right. I haven't used Paint in a hot minute, so we're just gonna start off with trying to get this circle function to go. And I don't know if you can even rotate in this tool, so I'm just gonna avoid that like the plague. I think this will give me the ability to do. Yep. Here we go. All right. No, I don't want to connect. Let me stop there. This one. Oh, it drew a box. All right, we're just going to run with it. I'm very clearly going to just live chat everything I'm doing.
I love it. It's like I'm watching a Twitch stream right now. This is perfect.
I don't know how to. Can I move stuff? You got to give me like a 1-minute timer so I know when I'm getting close.
Of course, yeah. You're still doing good. You're coming up on about 1:30 left.
Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. Well, we're just gonna. This is the new logo. You can submit this as Taylor's professional next brand designer opinion on what the Zeppelin logo should look like. I like to design in black and white first because I think it's the stronger approach.
You've got 1 minute remaining.
Stalling for, oh god! All right, so we get some like dark orange. Oh, this is not what I wanted to do. here and just hope this works. Then we have a reverse situation here, and then we're gonna just kind of speckle this, and even less here, which is not what I wanted to do, but that's fine. And then we're gonna do orange here, and then we'll try this little brown situation here, and done.
This is perfect. This is beautiful. You finished with still a little bit of time left, and I think truly it looks fantastic.
Hey, done is better than perfect. That is
another Taylor quote. This is like just chock full of little things we could put on like pillows and shirts. We're gonna have to make a merch line for you with all of these. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Taylor. That wraps up our session here today. I'd like to thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you had fun. If there's anything else that you'd like to say, any last nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to give our audience, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, no, keep keeping on. Nico, thanks for having me. This was awesome, and I hope folks continue to learn and experience and try to understand this ever-evolving design system space and weather all the weird tech layoff shit that we're constantly experiencing, and just keep making it through. So. Onward,
there we go. All right, beautiful. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Until next time, we will see you later. Take care. And then I usually like to let it run for about 10 seconds because I always prematurely stop it. And then like all the videos get cacked off. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop now.